So we've tried to focus in on areas where knowing something and being able to confidently do it is the metric of success. And so the leading indicator of being able to actually do something, which is something that's going to have to be observed on the job in most cases, is if somebody is confident in their mindset around it and their self the story they tell themselves about their ability to do it will be more predictive than just like, could you answer a multiple choice question? So,
hello and welcome to the Making Better podcast, where we talk about how to make ourselves, our teams, and our organizations better. Whether you are a business owner, a manager, or a learning and development professional, this show will give you actionable insights of how to improve your own performance and the performance of those around you. Our guest today is Ryan Findley. Ryan is a strategist, product leader, designer, and lifelong educator. He is currently the Chief Learning Strategist at Learn to Win, a learning platform focused on delivering more actionable and focused learning experiences. In today's discussion, we touch on Ryan's time leading learning programs in Africa and what technology can do to improve learning outcomes. Before we get into the discussion, I want to remind you that if this is your first time watching the show, I highly recommend you subscribe so that you never miss a future episode. And if you're already subscribed, then I would ask that you share this show with at least one other person, because that is how we grow. I can't tell you how much it means to me. And so with that, let's get into the discussion. Ryan, welcome to the Making Better podcast. How are you doing today?
thanks. Good. Thanks for having me. It's good to connect in this way. I guess we've been chatting for, I don't know, emailing, chatting for almost a couple of years by now. So it's fun to connect
Yeah, it's been a little while.
on your show. But yeah, I'm doing good.
Yeah. Excellent. That's good. Yeah. And we even got to meet in person
Yeah,
once
that's
and
right.
chat about some stuff, which was great.
Had some fish and chips, I
Yeah,
think.
this is one of, yeah, exactly. This is one of those situations where the online relationship came into an IRL relationship a little bit. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's always great to chat with you. I gave a little bit of an intro to the listeners beforehand, but I think we got to start with anybody who looks you up on LinkedIn is going to see you spent a bunch of time doing work in Africa and learning in Africa.
Yeah.
And that's a very different, direction for a lot of people to come from. How did you get involved with that, and what did you learn there?
Yeah. It really was a rich season of my career. It was almost 10 years of working in or kind of on different projects in Africa. So it was a huge chunk of my life and of my career. I actually started my first foray into working on the continent was through of all things, an apparel company. A couple of friends and I started, and we wanted to be a social business, kind of growing in Africa,
Great.
cutting, sewing, printing, and shipping from the continent, and really trying to like kind of rebuild what was once a pretty robust industrial base on the continent. And they kind of went through, they had a Rust Belt kind of situation like we did in the US. And a lot of the manufacturing jobs went to Southeast Asia. And so we were, it was almost like at first it was kind of an academic problem. Like, could you just like reestablish those factories and those sort of shipping and logistics sort of pieces and rebuild those industries. And what we found out through a couple of years of this pilot project was you could, but the biggest problem we had was when we got to a port, it was very it was very time what was I looking for? It was very time and dollar costly to get things from an African port to the US, which was one of our biggest markets to
Interesting.
sell. So you can make a cheaper shirt or sweatshirt or whatever in Africa if it's all African cotton and you kind of aren't shipping it all over the world. The problem is that by the time it gets to the US, because of the transportation costs just being so astronomical, that now you're selling something at 1.5 or 2x what it would cost from Southeast Asia, China.
Is is that just because there aren't the same as many established channels? Like there's just not as much traffic going that direction, so the
Yeah.
costs aren't as low?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one is basically that. Like you can put it on a plane and have it in 2 days, but now a $3 shirt, what might be a cost
Yeah,
$3 is now $9, because you
totally.
just had to absorb that cost. You could put it on a ship and that maybe only adds like $1 or something to the cost, but you're not going to see it for sometimes 6 weeks, because a lot of times the way these
Hmm.
shipping lines work is that they've got a box and they're saying, okay, we're going to fill this box with whatever needs to get imported to the US, and your box doesn't leave until it's full. So you
Mm-hmm.
could be the first person into that box with your all your shirts
Mm-hmm.
and sweatshirts and whatever else, and it could just sit there and they will make no promises about when that thing will get filled up, because for them it doesn't make sense to
Hmm.
ship an empty or half empty box. So you're counting on all these other people to fill it with with pottery or
Whatever.
with yeah with
Yeah.
anything they're making on the continent, and you're hopeful that everyone will do it in this short period of time so that you can get your goods. But at least in these really long lead times, and you have no predictability around your like when things will come in or when you can then
Yeah.
start advertising them and
Yeah.
printing them and all these things. So
Yeah.
it ended up
Yeah.
being a lot more complex than I had any idea. But through that, I fell in love with just working with the different cultures and variety of just the nuance of working in Africa. And that led to me
Mm-hmm.
going and taking a job teaching how to teaching kids how to build businesses and pursue entrepreneurial ventures in Africa. And so I was teaching at a really cool school down there called African Leadership Academy, which I still think is one of the coolest places in the world. The best and
That's
brightest
neat.
from all over Africa. These kids are 16 to 18, and all of them who are really chosen because they want to change the face of the continent. And so I was really very lucky and blessed to get to teach there for a couple of years.
That's awesome. So I noticed one of your last locations, at least what you have on LinkedIn, was on Mauritius.
Yeah,
Did you live there?
yeah, I got to live in Mauritius for we were
That's so
there about a
cool.
year and a quarter, maybe almost a year and a half.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was one of
Okay.
my
Yeah.
last
So
stops.
yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, make sure to look it up on the map because it's kind of out in the middle of the Indian Ocean. The only reason I know about it is because there's like a satellite communication station out there. And so on every SpaceX launch, something like 20 minutes after launch, there's always signal acquisition Mauritius as a call out as it as it gets over the
That's
island.
so funny. I didn't know
So
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. If you watch a SpaceX launch, almost every one there's
Oh, that's
it calls
cool.
it out in
I
there.
didn't know that.
Yeah,
It's big. It's well known in the military community because there's a big
yeah,
thing out there that nobody can
I'm
know.
sure.
But yeah,
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. So that's really neat. I can't even, I mean, that had to have been just such an inspiring kind of experience to be doing that kind of work out there. I mean, yeah, it must have been, right?
it was. I mean, I was just working with the most incredible people. The kids were amazing. The My colleagues were just always so invested, so passionate, so intelligent. Everybody that worked there could have been, you know, doing any other job. I mean, but I mean,
Yeah.
like they're just by that I mean they were just like so incredibly talented at what they did, and the fact that everyone took a pay cut and sort of just like a left turn to go to work at this school or with this kind of sister organizations, and because of that, it was just the cream of the crop when it came to the people I was working with and the kind of stuff that we have to do every day. And I was also there I was there at an opportune time when one of our founders wanted to create a new college out of thin air, and so I got to be there, working on the founding of a college, which most people just aren't lucky enough to be in the right place, right
Yeah.
time to do. And then the founding of an MBA program, and then an undergraduate degree program. I was just in the, sort of right place, right time for so many cool things that were just happening. And I just got to be involved because I was there. But yeah, it was the kind of thing where for those years, I barely register it as work. It was really just kind of like,
Yeah.
different ways to like kind of live out a passion and kind of a vigor for doing good things in the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. So then you went from there to Learn to Win,
Yeah.
which is a learning technology platform. How did that come about? How did that move come about?
Yeah, actually, so one of the guys I was working with at ALA, which was the high school, and ALU, which was the university, um, he and I stayed in touch, and we were working together in uh, we were together in Mauritius one time, and we were talking about what we were learning at the university level, which was, we were trying to have a high access, low cost university, which meant we wanted to have 250,000 students at all times across 25 countries, or campuses at least. And we wanted to do a whole college degree for like $10,000 to $15,000 total, not per year, total.
Yeah.
And the way
Yeah.
you do
Yeah.
that, the only way you get anywhere close to doing that is if you have a really strong technology that helps. You can basically take a lot of your recurring costs and push it to the technology. Of course, it's things like, student information systems and registrar and stuff like that you need to automate, admissions things, some of those things. But it got to the point where like we realized, okay, we've really got to somehow automate the learning. And so we were talking about, Andrew and I were just talking about, wow, if you could really automate learning at the university level, not entirely taking professors out or anything like that, but use technology in ways that was, where technology is effective, and use humans where humans are effective. If you can build a tool like that, like a Duolingo, but for a whole college degree,
All things.
well,
Yeah.
wow, that seems like that solves a big problem in the world, right? Not just for us at
Yeah.
ALU, but for other colleges. And wow, who else could, benefit from that, companies, et cetera. And so we were just kind of just literally just driving through sugarcane fields, just kind of spitballing ideas and things.
Love it.
And he just kind of had this line of like, yeah, my buddy Sasha and Andrew went to North Carolina, and his buddy Sasha played basketball there, and said like, oh, it's, he always found it was like really hard to learn the playbook at this university, great basketball program, really complicated playbook. And he was like, they talked about like, what if there was an app to like help players learn their playbook? And I was like, oh, that actually would be really fun to work on. It's kind of a micro version of that same problem. And I was like, if you
Yeah.
guys ever work on that, let me know, because that would be fun. And like 6 months later, they called me and they're like, hey, we're getting a working group together if you want to join in. And so we started doing nights and weekends, kicking around PowerPoints and, mock-ups and things like that. And yeah, within a year we had an MVP, and Andrew and Sasha were off to the races at Stanford, um, both like selling, but also, getting connections in the Silicon Valley area. And pretty soon Andrew called me and he's like, hey, so we just got a big chunk of funding. We're in the middle of grad school. Like, could you leave Mauritius and ALU and come get Learn to Win going? And I was like, yeah, let's do it, Zach. So yeah, I ended up joining full time in early 2020. Brought my wife and soon to be baby girl over to Bay Area in early 2020, and we started running Learn to Win. That's when I was working on Learn to Win full time.
So you moved to the Bay Area in early 2020. That must have been an experience right there.
Yeah. Everyone has their own story around it. But for me, landing in a new place, I hadn't lived in the Bay Area before.
Yeah.
Just about to have a baby, trying to get a startup off the ground was definitely it was crazy for me, that version of it.
I'm
And
sure.
yeah, we had an interesting, challenging, but also also rewarding time in the Bay. Did a couple years there, so it was good.
Yeah, it's an interesting. You decided to do the same like trial by fire that my wife and I did because we had our first child moved across the state, and I left left the military all at the same time.
Yeah.
So yours was yours. You were probably one of the few people I've met that did a more extreme version of doing all three things at once, because you didn't just move across a state; you moved halfway around the world. So
new job,
well done.
New country, which is my old country. Yeah, new
Yeah,
family edition. It was a lot. It was a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot. Wow. Well, you made it through. I'm sure you've learned a lot. It's neat that you focused on that technology piece, which I think is so interesting. So now I'm imagining you've gotten to know quite a bit about the learning technology space and what it means for education. You highlighted how that technology piece is a really key piece for certainly enabling, your original envision in higher ed, but it's the same thing that's true in corporations. Yeah. How have you found, what have you seen that things that need to change about learning technology in order to enable better learning inside organizations?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think one of the things that we at Learn to Win really quickly sort of gravitated towards was the value of data in learning tech, and just how, from our standpoint, there was a serious lack of insight from the data that was available in a lot of legacy tools. And I think, to be fair, I think a lot of early days of learning technology were really driven by SCORM formats and things like that, as well as that's sort of on one side, and on the other side was sort of ERP, SIS, or HRIS systems, or things that would evolve into LMSs, but just sort of had these certain restrictions that came from being really just enterprise. They were meant to be enterprise tools, not learning tools, right? They were for the benefit of the organization, not for the learner. And so that's sort of these two insights around this was built for the company and not the learner, and this was built without the ability to collect any meaningful data around where are students getting stuck, what content is effective, ineffective, or where are the learning gaps that people could target and practice remediation on, and then move past. And these were some of the things that we were seeing early on that they just weren't out there. And funny enough, it was some of our early customers in sports and military that helped us realize that, because they're the ones who were most interested in okay, so I did this, how do I know if it worked? Which it seems like an obvious question a lot of times, but if you look at the tools that a lot of learning, learning designers or CLOs or whatever were dealing with, it was the kinds of data they could get back was, well, they did it, or they didn't do it, or they got a 90%, or they got a fail, or it took them 22 minutes. And these things were not, you could maybe try to make them proxies for, was it worth doing this? What should I take from these analytics? But a lot of times they were just it was almost like they were meant to count something else, which was completion, basically, and compliance.
Yeah, I mean, when you, like you mentioned before, since a lot of this stuff kind of evolved from existing HR tech or organizational tech, it was, it really is very process driven rather than outcome driven.
Yeah, totally.
Which is, an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, and no shade, right? Because people were dealing with what they had, and when I look at the things that people were creating with an Articulate or something like that, these really robust learning experiences, and then you look at what was possible to get on the back end of that, and it's just there's such a mismatch with what the formats out there allowed for, and I know that's something that's evolved with XAPI and things like that, but just thinking about the legacy of these things was still very much archaic and not built around, I need data to make a decision. It's learning was just a thing to do versus a strategic function, right? And I think that's sort of philosophically how we see learning in organizations as using it as a strategic function, a thing that could be even like a leading indicator or a predictor of how someone might do. And, not in a way that's like going to like make predictions of like this person can't do their job, and so bad things happen to them. It's more like, hey, if you're a manager and we think there's a 30% chance that that people don't know how to run an emergency procedure or something. Like if you're on a medical floor and there's 30% chance that not everybody knows how to run a code blue, you could just say like, hey, let's take 3 minutes at the beginning of the shift and just make sure that we cover code blue again. Or, here are the emergency exits. Or here's what you do if your rudder isn't working, or your I don't know, this sort of machine, you're mid-surgery and this sort of thing just doesn't work anymore. What then should we do? And so we think there's a world in which learning and assessment is on the front end of these things and is actually a contributor to getting out ahead of mistakes or just compromising situations.
Yeah, and because I don't know how much you've dove into, you mentioned XAPI, how much you've dove into that or that world. Because I mean, I know from my perspective, I feel like one of the reasons, there's probably many, but one of the reasons why XAPI has had trouble gaining traction and wide usage is kind of because it's such a wide open field.
Yeah.
Like you can really do anything with it. You can track whatever you want. And so it's just like, if I'm a learning designer and all I've ever, done is completions and maybe score percentages, then it's almost too much. Yeah. Whereas it feels like with Learn to Win, you all at least the last time I saw it, you all centered in on this idea of confidence of the learner, where that was the big additional data point that you're using as a strong proxy to do they truly understand it, and asking them just how confident are you in your knowledge. Is that paring down, like how is that process done? Is that part of the reason why you selected it, to kind of just like eliminate these many choices?
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, XAPI is amazing in that way, and also probably just kind of like paralyzing in that way, because I mean, if you're in the Navy or the Air Force, like there's maybe a lot of things you might want to track from simulators and from different things, but like most people, there are only a couple extra things they might want to, but then it can also get complicated, and so I think there's a lot possible. There's still there's not necessarily clarity around it or strategic thinking around it always, and I think it'll be emerging, but it's murky. What we've done with that is we've said, okay, well, what's one of the most important things that we can capture very easily? And one of those things is, we think, confidence, because in almost every field that we work in, the ability to perform the work is incredibly important. It's like we don't really serve industries where you want people to know trivia. I would
not a compliance tool.
No, and I would challenge that, like, most people outside of like compliance laws, most companies do not have the time or capacity for trivia. It's just like, it's something that's just like has kind of happened because, well, trivia is something we could count. And if somebody knows what year the company was founded, well, I could give you a quiz on that. And okay, yeah, they know that the company was founded in 2001, but does that help them do their job, right? Not usually. So we've tried to focus in on areas where knowing something and being able to confidently do it is the metric of success. And so the leading indicator of being able to actually do something, which is something that's going to have to be observed on the job in most cases, is if somebody is confident in their mindset around it and their self, the story they tell themselves about their ability to do it will be more predictive than just like, could you answer a multiple choice question? So with our asking people not only what their answer is, but how confident they are in their answer, we're kind of able to add the second dimension of learning, data that hasn't existed in for most time and in most places. It gives you that second place to say, okay, well, they know it, but they don't think that they know it, right? Which is a very different problem. It's a very different problem from somebody who doesn't know the answer and they're 100% sure that they know it, right? Those are like
Yeah.
two different humans basically. But
Yeah.
if you imagine like your average classroom, that's just like a right answer and a wrong answer. You don't necessarily see it with the color, but when you see somebody who's right, but they didn't even know that, and somebody who's wrong,
Hmm.
but they believed it in their heart and their soul, you can just imagine those two people in your mind and being like, oh man, I need to put them in different corners of the room and do totally different, take totally different steps with them to
Yeah.
get them to where they need to be, which is everyone wants their learners to be confidently correct. And so,
It,
yeah.
And you reminded me of Annie Duke's book, Thinking in Bets.
Mm,
And she's a former professional poker player. And she always talks about how you can be right for the wrong reasons and you can be wrong for the right reasons. Like you can get something wrong, but still you were thinking the right way when you got it wrong.
yeah.
That's
Yeah,
interesting.
that's a very good analogy. I see a lot of connections to poker there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Absolutely.
mm, yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's when
So,
you start to see that, it's like, wow, okay, that actually is a really helpful dimension,
yeah.
to knowing what then should I do with this person, right? Because the right and the wrong answer is
Hmm.
just the first step. What comes next is what's really valuable. And again, we're trying to march these people along to being confidently correct and able to do that job, and know that they can do whatever job is required of them.
Yeah, and I love that approach really because it just accepts the fact that, let's be clear, like most jobs actually, though what we ultimately care about, can somebody do a thing?
Yeah,
And most things are just going to be too complicated for you to try to stuff into a learning platform and actually test. You got to
yeah,
go have them do it, watch them. So we're almost kind of just assuming that's something that's gonna have to happen, be tested on the job. So what's the closest corollary we can get to that? It's not trivia, it's not multiple choice questions. It's just, do you feel confident that you're gonna be able to do this? Yes or no?
yeah,
Or how, not yes or no, but the whole scale there. I love
yeah,
that approach.
yeah,
So then we've briefly talked about AI a little bit in past
yeah,
conversations. I know you're thinking a little bit about it because I do think AI opens up a lot more possibilities with this idea of really testing people's understanding, because now instead of a instead of a multiple choice question, you can potentially, maybe not quite yet, but you can potentially create a scenario where you do ask somebody like, tell us your sales pitch. And
yeah,
then they speak it, and then the AI can judge them in a realistic way.
yeah.
How are you starting to think about AI, how AI is going to affect learning technology in that assessment part of it? Because there's the whole creation piece, which a lot of
Yeah.
people are utilizing. How do you see it affecting the assessment and the evaluation piece?
Yeah, I think that's, to be honest, more exciting than the creation stuff. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there are really cool things on the creation side, and what I do like about the creation side is, I think you're going to be able to assess where somebody is and auto generate
Mm.
questions
Mm.
that get people up to where they need to be.
Yep.
And that will be cool, and that will be really effective. I think on the analytics side, though, there's a lot that's going to be able to be learned about, like when you have enough data, I think you're going to be able to start making some really strong predictions, or like very well informed guesses about where are pockets of people who are ready for a promotion, or who would make great
Mm.
mentors, or
Mm.
people who are maybe, they're not being fully utilized in the company, and being able to identify that within the realm of learning, but extrapolate it to the job, or real world performance. Um,
Yeah.
Even somebody like, hey, based on what we're seeing from, if you've got like a fairly extensive, well, let's say you've got something like a financial plan or something where it's like a pretty extensive, uh, ramp up time to get somebody going. If you see somebody who's like really shoots out of the gates, and that for the last 50 people who've gone out like that, they've been top performing, financial planners or something, like why
Yeah.
would HR not want to know about that, right? Why would that person's
Yeah.
manager not want to
Yeah.
know about that? It seems like obvious to me that these things can start to be predictors of and influencers of what happens in a person's career. And similarly, if you see somebody who's like struggling out the gate, and you know that 99% of people who start this way don't make it through, maybe there's a place to have a compassionate conversation early on there with that person to say like, hey, we'd be happy to keep you around. We just want you to know that like based on your trajectory, you may not make it in the way that you think. What adjustments can we make now to change your trajectory, right? And someone might be like, holy smokes, I didn't know that I was studying poorly, or that the first 3 weeks were so crucial. I can really double down now. I think there are other things you can start to do with looking at groups of people and being able to predict performance. The people who are leading here, by a long shot, in my opinion, is the sales tech tools, because
Yes.
what they're looking at is they're looking at all this data that's coming in from, outreach to how many times are they, doing kind of a pulse with sales leads, with how confident are they on the phone, all these things, and as well as learning in some of the tools. And they're starting to make predictions about what is the revenue that every rep is going to contribute, and rolling that up to the level of a CRO or a VP of sales to say like, hey, this region's about to miss because these 3 people who are specializing on this product is about to miss. If you're in sales, like, yeah, it's easy to fire people, but it's hard to replace them. It'd be much easier if you can to sort of do some targeted training. And if that can be highlighted for you 5 weeks before the quarter is over versus 3 weeks after the quarter is over, that is incredibly valuable. And I think that's why these things are happening in sales first, because there's just so much money to gain or to lose. But I can see that stuff, those kinds of things trickling into learning tech everywhere. And I really see an eventual like merging of learning tech and enterprise software of all sorts, because I think, again, I do think there's value in the predictive nature of what people know and can demonstrate in learning realms, and how that translates to actual performance.
Yeah, I agree. I was actually on a call. I'm part of the planning committee for ATD Technology, and we were talking about AI and how to have like a conversation around AI. And we were just kind of struggling of like how to have a better conversation or a different conversation than what is commonly happening at a lot of conferences, because it's so new. It's kind of just like, oh, it's this big thing. We don't really know how it's going to affect us, or it's very focused on generative AI. And yet, and I think it's just because ultimately we might fight it, but learning isn't. There's a lot of money in learning. You know that, like you started a learning tech company, so there is money in learning, for sure. But it is dwarfed by the money in like sales or places like that.
For sure.
And so, I do think you're 100% right that that's the place to look for advances in utilizing this stuff, and it's certainly going to be. It's the closest corollary to how we're going to use it. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. That's awesome.
Yeah, and sales enablement tools are amazing if you look at what they can do with like pitch practice, role plays. I mean, all these things are being automated because for them it's so expensive to have a rep wash out, or to fly everybody to Vegas. Like, yeah, the reps loved it, but what did you get out of it? It's much more productive to say, hey, take 3 hours of an afternoon and work on your pitch for the next quarter's big product launch. And then managers are getting to see the roll up of how much talk time did people have, or how confidently could they speak to the new tools or releases. And oh my gosh, like the data around that and the ability of a sales leader to make pinpointed decisions and corrections based off that is just unreal.
It's a good point. I can see a world where sales enablement tools really leapfrog into a lot of learning tech, because my biggest problem with sales enablement tools historically, when I've looked at them from a core learning perspective, is that they just tend to have a different expectation for like the ratio of learning personnel to learners. Right. Mm-hmm. I've seen plenty of sales, when you look at the sales enablement team versus the sales team, it might be 1 to 10 or 1 to 20 or on a high end, maybe like 1 to 50. Whereas
It
in
just
the
doesn't.
broader corporate learning world,
Yeah.
it's like 1 to
It's
1,000.
10x that. Yeah.
And so exactly. And so the scaling tools weren't there in the enablement tech, but those are probably the things that, but when they build AI into it, I can imagine a world where all those things that weren't scalable before become very scalable, which could solve a lot of those problems. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm
I want to be
very,
respectful of
I
your.
think, yeah.
Oh no, please
Sorry,
go
good
ahead. Finish
delay.
your answer.
No, I was just saying, like,
Yeah.
I've reviewed many sales enablement tools, and some are clearly better than others, but there are a couple where I'm very impressed with what they're doing from a learning standpoint. And
Hmm.
I could even see them making legitimate plays to compete with LMSs very soon.
Yep. Yeah. No, totally. Well, I want to be respectful of your time, so I want to finish this up. I think this has been a great, really interesting conversation on kind of the learning tech front. We'll usually finish up with 3 questions with
Cool.
kind of rapid fire questions. And so the first one
Yep.
is, what is one book or podcast that someone should read or listen to, and why?
It's been a great read. It's called What's Our Problem?
Yep.
And it's a really interesting sort of like meta-analysis of like what's going on in society. So Tim Urban is the author. Just like a really interesting read from, from a very like zoomed out perspective. He's kind of like a social commentator. I think he has like other formal training as like a software guy or something, but has been writing, okay, I think it's Wait, But Why for a very long time.
Wow.
And just take these long form breakdowns of like, why is this like this, and just going into like all the facets of it. So really interesting writing. And in this, he sort of starts to unpack of like, what are we seeing in our world, in the US? And he talks a lot, mostly about the US, but what we could do to sort of start getting back to maybe where I think a lot of people would like to be.
Yeah, I've listened to a lot of interviews with him, where he talks about the book and talks about kind of the larger concept of, if all of human history, if of modern human history was, I think he uses like a 500-page book, and
Yeah.
the Declaration of Independence was written like 2/3 of the way down the last page, or
Yeah.
something crazy
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. This
You know,
perspective of like all the things that have happened and how like he just has like this visual of like all these boxes of time. And it's like, you only get to the very bottom of all these boxes. And it's like, the first evidence of human art or something. And it's just like, holy
yeah,
smokes, like this is the last
yes,
tenth of this page, or hundredth of this page
yes,
almost. And then you start to think about like civil rights movement and all these things that have happened in like the last like whatever however many years for us are just like in the scheme of known human history is like it's just like a line you couldn't even see on the page, and just
yeah,
sort of putting these things
yeah.
into perspective is really interesting.
Yeah, super interesting. Awesome. That's a great one. Okay.
Yeah.
Second question. What is one skill that has helped you most succeed in your life?
I think resourcefulness is one of my favorite like go-to skills,
Yeah.
because it just sort of like you're sort of never stuck if you're resourceful. There's always some like maneuvering or some way to just like think anew about a problem or a limitation or something. And so I think that's if you can just like I don't even know. I'd love to figure out how to like cultivate that in my kids, but I think resourcefulness is one of those skills that I've just benefited from time and again.
Awesome. That's a great one. And then final question that I think we've kind of touched on this a little bit throughout the episode or our discussion, and I'm sure you would have a great perspective on this since you talk to a lot of different organizations. But what is the most common opportunity you see for organizations to improve talent development?
I think I would come back to that data piece, is really
Yeah.
not just saying like what was our throughput, but what was our true success rate, and part of that is let's define our success what does success look like? What are we actually looking to do? In what ways are we trying to move the needle? And then think about how do we measure those things? And I think that I don't believe that maybe all of those can be, all those data points can come necessarily from the learning realm, but at least more than the few or zero that they're getting now. And I think that if people are more intentional about the ways we want to improve performance or retention or whatever it is, call those out and work backwards from those from a learning standpoint, I think there's a lot more that there's a lot that companies could gain from doing that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for your time today. I thought this was a great discussion. I'm sure it gave a little bit of a perspective. Learning technology is one of those things that, honestly, I really love talking about it, but I think a lot of people don't necessarily have time to think about it, or they don't get into the nitty gritty because IT handles their systems or something like that. But it really is, it's an enabler for what we do. So I'm appreciative of you taking the time today. I'm really excited about the work you and Learn to Win are doing to kind of advance this front of getting us thinking about this technology a little bit better. So thank you again so much, and have a great rest of your day.
You got it. Thanks, Matt. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you liked the discussion, make sure to hit like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. As a reminder, if your team is struggling keeping up with the training development demands of your organization, we want to help. Better Everyday Studios is a full-service instructional design team that can help you with everything from ideation to actual content creation and delivery. Please reach out to us using the link in the episode notes below. Have a great day.